So again, welcome everyone to today's session. A little less training today and a little more presentation of a variety of options that we offer. A little bit outside the realm of just what to click on in ARM and more um, taking taking advantage of all of those things you've maybe learned with us throughout this year on creating SEs or report sets or rule sets, a variety of things that you do in ARM. The idea today is to spread those along to the others in your company. And so um, try to give this whole idea a name, whether it's validation list library is usually what I end up calling it, although we'll dive in and see it doesn't have to just be list files, but that's usually where the conversation starts at least. So like I said, the goal is really to share these standardizations, these tools, the things you've used in ARM. Maybe you've gotten really, really good with ARM, and you look to the other users in your company, or maybe you're purchasing new licenses, trying to spread the use of the program. How can I get these others online and caught up to what I've been doing? Specifically, of course, data that goes into a trial, that is, of course, universal, saved into that trial. So we're talking more about the product list is probably the most time-consuming, biggest category, but really any other lists as well that you populate, you fill in as you've used ARM. Of course, if you start in on a new computer or have someone new start in your company, those lists are empty. They are the way they were when you first started with ARM. So, what are ways we can populate those for those others? And in addition to the lists, all of those different files that you can create to help standardize your trials. Like I said, we talk about these very often in these webinars, your standard evaluations, or your SEs, view files for any of your editor views, report sets, rule sets, ST summary sets, the whole 9 yards. When you save something to your computer to use again and again, boy, it'd be awesome if we could get that onto everyone's computer, right? So a couple terminology to define here, because I'll just kind of keep referring back to these throughout this discussion. Um, just trying to give a name to the person that's kind of initiating this standardization, this sharing of the files. We'll just name them the data coordinator. Whoever it is, that kind of becomes the source of all of these lists and files to share. It's typically it's you, the person listening here, that's talking to GDM, learning how to use ARM to its full capabilities. That usually ends up being the person. But it might be probably the person using ARM the longest. Oh well, so and so that been here for 10 years now. I'm sure their lists are the best, or however you would determine it. Um, Whenever we talk about that source, I'll just call them the data coordinator, and getting things going and using their files to share with others. And as far as in the world of validation lists, kind of two different types in ARM I kind of want to distinguish because what we do with them in this discussion varies. You have your favorites list, and those are when there already is kind of a master dictionary from ARM available. Most obvious example probably would be your crops and your pests. There's a huge catalog from EPO of all of the crops, all the different insects and weeds. And so that list is huge. The favorites exist as a nice way to shorten those big lists down to just the ones you encounter. So in ARM, there's that little star button that you click on when you're looking at a list to say, save that one for me to use later. It's my favorites, so I have only a handful to deal with and look at instead of scrolling through the huge list throughout. Separate of that would be what I call your user-built lists, I guess. The idea being when we install ARM, those lists that are empty, or maybe they have a couple of example values, but they really don't mean anything because it's very much specific to the research you're doing or to your company. That information might be proprietary, like a product list. Um, Other examples would be like your contacts. Obviously, there's no master list somewhere being upheld of everyone doing research everywhere. That would be impractical. So your contacts are totally empty. So those types of lists in ARM we'll call the user-built lists. And that's kind of our focus today. Just in general, if I say validation list, that's probably what I'm referring to, because as far as the sharing goes, that's usually the biggest thing, right? Is I've built this product list from scratch, or all of the contacts that this company, all those people that we work with as a company. Number one, those lists might be kind of long as you think about having to fill them in or type them into a trial each and every time. Those lists grow and grow. That's kind of the biggest bang for your buck as far as today's topic of sharing with others. Let's get a standard list. Everyone's picking it from the same. We don't have to keep typing that information in or get it slightly wrong. Okay, so there are kind of a variety of different options for sharing these types of files, and we'll kind of just step through each of them today. Um, the first category, I guess we'll kind of separate them into two different outcomes. The first one would be if you're looking for just a one-time copy of all of the files over. And you can do kind of everything we've been talking about with the lists and standardization files. Most common example maybe would be a new user, right? Totally fresh start. Let me just bring everything that's on my computer. Let's just give it to them as well. Just the same as if I myself were moving to a new computer, and I would have to start from scratch. It would be awesome just to take everything and copy that over. Alternatively, I could be picky about it if I want to strategize just specific files. There's a separate process for that, but it is possible to copy just particular types of files. So for a one-time copy, that's great just to get off the ground, but maybe more powerful for a over time process would be if I can continuously sync or even distribute these files to everyone in my company. And so again, that'll be kind of similar to the one-time copy, whether I'm looking for a specific set of files or this idea of everything, all the lists that matter. So those will be the two options. The biggest thing here with setting up a system like that is you do need some sort of shared drive. That is common among all of those ARM users that you're wanting to share with. Since you have that continuous syncing, everyone has to be able to have a common location where those files can come back and forth from. And it could be, could be a cloud service like a Google Drive, OneDrive, Dropbox type of thing, or a local, your company's network intranet type of thing would work as well. Okay, so diving into each of these, our first category was those one-time copy. And the first kind of the most basic automated thing would be just to utilize the migration package functionality in ARM. Kind of hinted at it actually a moment ago. The original purpose of that migration package, everything on this computer that I have that I've customized to my liking in ARM, I want to copy all of that so I can bring it over to a new computer. So that way I don't miss a beat in terms of my ARM usage. Really, you can use that process. Doesn't have to be you moving to a new computer. It can be you just copying your info to share with another ARM user. So kind of a handy side effect of that functionality. The key with that is that there's no picking and choosing. It's everything. It's going to grab all your favorites, all your user built lists, and then the sets views, those standardization files. Everything comes together in that package. So again, really great for someone brand new. Or maybe it's kind of just like a once a year catching up, you know, from the data coordinator. You could make a migration package once a year. Okay, research season's kind of winding down. We made it to the end. I'm going to just make a migration package because number one, it's great for me to back up my list in case something happens to my computer in the middle of next season when things are wild and crazy. So that's a good handy thing to get in the habit of anyway. And then, hey, why don't I share that package with everyone else? And if they load that migration package that I've saved to a thumb drive or to a network location, then it will replace everything. So you have to be a little careful, but as long as they're happy just syncing up with you kind of in a manual way, all of their lists will be replaced with the ones from your computer. So that one's kind of the fastest, simplest. Is all really built in functionality in ARM, very clear what to do. But of course, you kind of have no control at all, right? It's just everything, and everything gets replaced. The alternative within the one-time copy umbrella would be to specify certain files that you want to share instead of having to take everything. It is, of course, then manual because I have to go and pick the ones I care about. But it is pretty easy to distribute. So we'll show it in a moment, talking through how that works. But it's just a file that you name with an A7Z as the file extension. That's really all the magic behind it. It's very easy then to share. And like I said, you get to pick the files instead of having to do everything with the migration package. So let's step back one moment here, back to that migration package. Like I said, very straightforward commands to implement. They're both under the utilities menu. If you want to create the package to start with, on utilities, you just choose migrate studies and settings to new computer. Then there's a short little wizard that'll just step you through. So you pick the path where that's going to go, and choose. I think it'll ask you what components you want to bring, but you would always want to choose the first and the second in the list. I think of the three, you always have to do the first one. It's the settings of ARM. Then the middle option is like personalization of study definition files, which is exactly what we're talking about today. All of those sets and lists, things like that. So you, of course, want to choose that option. It does give you the choice to transfer trials. That's pretty much never useful really anymore now that everyone has a cloud or network of some sort to store your trials with. So it's not hard to transfer trials anymore. But anyway, pretty simple, straightforward method for creating it, and then to load for each person who would want to use that package in their ARM. It would just be under utilities and load a migration package. And then you just have to choose the folder where it's at, and their ARM will bring in everything onto their computer. A little trick, I guess, as I was kind of testing that workflow to make sure it would work. When you make a migration package, maybe I'll see if I can find it on my computer here. When you make a migration package, like I said, there'll be kind of two components that get created. And so a shortcut would be if you, here we go. When you create one, it'll generate a folder called ARM backup. It's like where it likes to create that folder to put everything inside it, right? So effectively, ARM backup is like the package, but it really is just a folder that'll have any trials. It'll have your settings, and then this gdmdef.a7z. That is that middle option I talked about, your your study definition files. So you could load the migration package, or this is that file type that we'll talk about a little more next. But you can see Windows knows that is an ARM type of file. And if you double click on it, ARM will load that package automatically once you log in. So just another option. If you want to make that package and then send it in an email or something, that'd be another way to get basically the same results. In fact, they would just avoid bringing in your settings, which really might not be something you want to have to match if you're sharing with others in your company. So again, very simple with the migration package, pretty fast and straightforward, but not any control at all as far as you just have to get everything. The picking and choosing, that A7Z file, pretty simple actually to create. You would dive into your computer in that gdmdef folder where your lists and your SEs and things like that are saved. And you can just dive in and select all of the files that you do want to share, and then save them into a zip folder or a compressed folder. And it's just a simple right click within Windows to do that. The command I'm looking in my Windows I think you can just send to a compressed zip folder right in Windows, and that'll put everything into a folder. Hopefully it'll call it gdmdef.zip, usually .zip. And the only real trick to making it work directly with ARM is to then rename that file to change the file extension. So nothing really magical other than that. And just by changing, instead of .zip, changing it to A7Z, then that changes. So Windows will send the file to ARM instead of its usual zip functionality. And when you do that, then if you double click on that file, or you'd share it with someone else, they would double click on that A7Z. Then ARM takes it. Once they log in, ARM puts all of the files that were contained in that folder, puts it onto that person's computer when they open it. So it's actually pretty smooth and simple. It's just that little trick of knowing how to generate it. And probably the strategy of what file do I want to share. So just depending on how savvy you are, if you know what lists you want, or if it's something as easy as the report sets, those have their own file extension, so pretty easy to find on your computer to share them with others so they can get those onto their computer. So those are the two methods if you want just a one-time sharing of these types of files. Bring them all with the migration package, or be choosy and use that A7Z method. Just pausing for questions before we move on to the other half with syncing. And for sure, something like that A7Z file, don't have to memorize how to do it. You can always shoot us an email when you're at that point. Hey, I remember hearing there's some simple way. Like we can always send you instructions that are a little more thorough than just step one, step two, to kind of help jog your memory on how to do that. But like I said, once you've done it once, it's pretty simple and easy to repeat. Perfect. All right, so the other side of the coin would be to take this up a notch. Instead of just a once a year type of thing or a one-time transfer that requires me, the data coordinator, to manually do work every time I want to update everyone. And then there's that unknown of, yeah, I sent it in an email, but did people even read the email? Did they load my list in? Did they click on that file? Especially depending on the size of your group, that can be a little bit trickier to actually get truly standardized across everyone. So kind of the next progression would be to set up a syncing method or distributing the files. And of course, the big thing is having that shared drive that everyone with an ARM has access to. Nowadays, not a terribly big deal in all likelihood. That's you probably have your ARM trials and all of the research files probably already in something like that. So it's not too difficult. Let's just make a separate folder to be able to do some of this syncing with. And so the only other requirement, of course, is having somebody, again, we're calling them the data coordinator, somebody that is going to manage this, because we need a source and to keep it updated. So there's really three different methods that we'll talk through for this. There is a system of batch files that we can create for a company, and basically that just allows ARM to copy to and from that shared drive, bringing the lists, distributing the lists, and bringing them back in on the other people's computers. Could also just change the path that everyone's ARMs typically are looking at your hard drive for the study definition folder. We could actually recreate that folder out in a shared drive. And so we just divert ARM all over to that common folder. So it's no longer separate folder on each person's computer, but one folder out there in the cloud that everyone is looking at. And then finally, a full-fledged distribution of the files using check for updates. Being able to create a line item right in the check for updates tool when you run the updater from ARM, or oftentimes it'll run itself when you close ARM once a week or whatever the default is in your settings. You can have a company specific one that will only be visible to those in your company. question here is can it be a combined list from more than one person? Um, so for most of these, I would say pretty much everything in this discussion really is one list file. We don't really have a tool where you could have like three people um, merge, for lack of a better term, merge their lists together into one. Really, everything is just taking your list file that would be on somebody's computer. We keep calling them the data coordinator. Taking that one LST list file and then just sending it to someone else's computer. Um, I think though, that is a question I've seen before. Naturally, um, having having a way to combine heads together to make a master list, I think that would be something you would do kind of the step right before you would implement one of these steps. So basically, you would still choose a data coordinator. Um, let's say it's you, me, and Michelle will pull from the audience. We're all in a company together. I've got some, maybe it's products, right? It's different treatments that I typically work on. Michelle has a few different ones that she works on, and we have some that are the same, and you as well. Um, Ideally, what you would do before starting to distribute is, okay, I'll raise my hand, I'll volunteer to be the data coordinator. And so I would need to beef up my list to include some from Michelle's list and some from your list as well, and bring everyone together into one master list that's on my computer. Or maybe it's Michelle, whoever we want to choose to be the true leader. And there's a couple ways to do that. I could send you, I think I have some screenshots or some steps on how best to do that. Just kind of thinking from the hip here, if I were I'll open a trial quick because a person can edit their list. I'm going to use treatment list, but of course, this same idea would apply to really any validation list that we'd want. So if I were to look into my herbicide list, I've got all the default ones here, but pretend these are interesting and are company specific ones. Um, there's an edit button at the bottom of that list, and it will open that list file in just about, pretty much what Excel would be like. It isn't Excel, it's just ARM, but everything is editable. And so it'd be pretty easy then for me to add more items. Or conversely, I could, copy a bunch of this and save it into like an Excel spreadsheet that I send to Michelle. Maybe Michelle will actually be the one to bring everything together and she'll be our data coordinator. So I could just take the items that I know I have in my list that she wouldn't, and I could copy these into like an Excel sheet. And then she could open up her list and just paste them in. So there'd be a slightly manual way to combine your lists, with the idea then that of the three of us, somebody will then have everything as kind of the master. Then we would dive into any of these, all of the discussion from the slides today. Any one of these options now are available because you've kind of caught up at least one set. Because yeah, you're exactly right. That second question, everyone would get your list, and kind of running through all the options we're talking about, and really everything we're talking about today, it isn't a merging or combining. It is just replacing. So once you set up somebody with really any of these options, either the one-time copy or syncing, it is going to erase what's already there. So kind of before you connect someone up to some of these some of these methods, you do kind of want to say, all right, do I have a complete list, or should we work together to make sure that one of our computers has everything in it? And then we'll use that to share with everyone. So that's a really good point, and kind of probably something I should add when we're first defining that data coordinator, really, because that's part of that choosing the data coordinator is to kind of combine, um, to know that, hey, if we do this, whatever files I'm choosing, those are going to be replaced. So we want to make sure that mine is complete. And once you do that, now suddenly you kind of, as the data coordinator, are getting a responsibility that maybe wasn't there before, that, oh, hey, someone else in my group wants to add a product or has some code that they want to use or whatever. Typically, they would just add to their own list. Don't have to talk to anyone, right? I'll just add it to my list because I'm the one using it. Now we have this formality where they're going to want to communicate that to me, the data coordinator, because I need to put it in my list. So that way everyone will get it, including that person who needs it. So a very good question, uh, because that is kind of a big point that it's obviously there's a big benefit to standardizing, but there is this responsibility that comes with it, this extra little bit of work, if you call that extra, requirement of communication, um, if you do want everything truly standard. And probably a good pro and con, that one-time copy of being able to choose specific files, then you reduce how many of these lists that it really matters, right? You can be very choosy on what you do need to communicate with, and the lists that don't really matter, you know. Great question. Like I said, I kind of just talked through that, but if you do, if you would like instructions kind of on that process, as I was just kind of clicking wildly in my ARM, we can definitely provide just, one, two, three, four, and kind of how to put your heads together, if you will, to get lists combined nicely. All right, so let's dive into each of these syncing methods. So the first one is batch files, and the implementation of it doesn't matter a ton, but I do like to talk through it because it kind of paints the picture of what's going to happen, even though the actual logic, the files, is something GDM creates. We walk you through it. I just have a couple of questions to ask. We go through and we create the files. So you don't have to know anything about it really, but it comes in handy to see the picture of what it is doing. So just like with all of these, we start with a data coordinator. Somebody has the master copy of the files on their computer. And what these batch files that we create do, it triggers your ARM, specifically the data coordinator's ARM will copy their lists to a cloud location, to the validation list library, if you will. When you close down the last ARM window for the day, it'll copy all of your lists. Presumably, if you've made any changes, let's copy those out to that cloud location. So that populates, that fills this library, if you will, with the master copy from the data coordinator. And on the flip side, all of your subscribers, so any other ARM user in your company will set up a slightly different batch file for them. And once they put it on their computer, then their ARM program, when they open up ARM for the first time each day, their ARM reads from the cloud in that library location and copies down any of those lists or SE files or whatever. So that way on their computer now is kind of it's somewhat of a manual copy, but ARM is doing that manual copy automatically. So it doesn't take any user intervention, but it is just a very rudimentary copy function that gets run whenever your ARM has these batch files that we created. So that's kind of the behind the scenes on what happens. Like I said, the actual creation of those batch files, it's really simple. It's not terribly hard. And you don't have to know anything about it. That's, GDM does that for you. So one of the key advantages for this, we can pick and choose which files get copied. So you can, by default, we have a pretty wide net of pretty much everything that's in the migration package, all of those user built lists, all the report sets, all the SEs is the default, but that's one of the questions as we work with you to set it up is what do you care about? So these batch files, since we're setting them up separate for each company, you get to choose which files are included. So that's a nice benefit. And it really is set it and forget it. I work with groups, and once we get it set up, sometimes you have to troubleshoot that very first person who wants to connect just to make sure, oh, yep, that's the path. It's working correctly. But once it works, it just works. And people don't have to do anything special. You, as the data coordinator, don't have to do anything special either. It's just as you maintain and update the lists on your computer, you just know that by tomorrow, those will be out there for everyone else's ARMs to be pulling down. That benefit is probably the only con that, disadvantage I can think of is it can be fragile if people forget that the system is in place. Just because it's so, you don't even see it, you don't think about it. If that data coordinator person who set it up, if they move on to a different company or maybe a different role within the company and they're using ARM less, or your cloud location, people move folders around, suddenly it's just not working. And just because it is so not visible and automatic, you might not notice that it's not working. So that's really about the only kind of gotcha that does come up. And then groups will be like, I don't think it's working. It's probably been a while that it hasn't been doing anything. And we can always help troubleshoot then because we have a copy of those batch files and we can kind of dig up the emails and try to remember, hey, yeah, back 2 years ago, this is what you had done. Do you still want to do that? Should we re-engage this workflow? So that's the batch file implementation there. It's a pretty, kind of rudimentary in what the technical muscle is, but it works pretty smoothly overall. The second option is diverting your ARM to a common definitions path. Basically, you just move that entire GDM def folder. That's where anytime you create an SE or a rule set, it always goes into that folder. We basically just move that instead of it being on your hard drive. Let's move that to the cloud. So everyone's ARM is looking to essentially the same folder. Pretty straightforward. logically speaking, at least. There's no separate files that have to get created or anything. The big gotcha, it's so straightforward. We've actually kind of run into groups that have just done that on their own. They just think, hey, we'll just we'll just make this folder. When we see that in the options, you can just move that path. The one problem that is less obvious is that your check for updates also needs to know that you've changed that folder. So check for updates is a separate process from ARM. So it doesn't use the file path in ARM to update. So that's kind of the gotcha there, that if you've done it on your own before, it usually eventually there's some sort of technical problem that comes up, that isn't very clear what's going on. And it takes me 45 minutes, an hour of messing around remotely on the computer, trying to understand what is happening before we remember, oh, wait, what's your study definition folder? And we find out that, oh, yeah, well, I'm on ARM 2025, but my definitions folder hasn't been updated since 2022 when we changed, and moved this way. And so that's kind of the big point that I like to hammer on, that there is one extra step that's less obvious, but just as important, to make sure your updater will make sure those definition files, like the study definition, the G-all definition files, stay up to date with your ARM program updates. So this option is certainly viable. Of the three, it's my least favorite, I think. The downsides to doing this is it is the whole folder in its entirety, so there is no choice. Much like the migration package, there's zero options for which files to sync, because it is the entire folder. It is everything. So everyone is forced to be using the same lists, the same set of files. So no one can maintain their own favorites lists, for example, even much less the user built lists and things like that. It all is just forced to be the same because of how this is implemented. It's the whole path. And then, just depending on the source, if it's a company intranet, it's probably pretty close to instantaneous, but definitely with like cloud services, it might be just a little bit of a delay if two of us are trying to add a new product to the herbicide product list, for example, or whatever list it is. If we both do it at the very same time on separate computers, is there going to be a change conflict that two people try to change the same list file at the same time? And how does your network, or how does the cloud deal with that? So feels to me like it's maybe just a little bit less consistent, a little less foolproof, if you will. Like I said, definitely have had groups do this before, sometimes totally on their own onus, and have been successful for years until there's a goofy thing that comes up. So it's viable, just maybe not my favorite of the three. Last but definitely not least, would be really setting up a full distribution of files using ARM's check for updates. And so the data coordinator, whoever wants to set this up, a little more formal process of posting a master copy of files. So it is nice that it can be separate from what is on your computer, which maybe is a pro and a con, depending on your requirements. But an advantage would be there is a little more flexibility in the location where the master set of files are stored. Currently, check for updates is able to communicate with a shared folder if it's on a company intranet or something like Dropbox or OneDrive. If there's like a common path, everyone in my company has the has the H drive, and it's H, ARM files, yada yada yada. There's set path where I'm storing all of these files. Everyone that uses ARM in my company has that same path. Pretty easy for check for updates then to utilize that path to pull down the files. It's also possible with HTTPS just having a URL that is stable and available. We've had companies where their IT will set up some specific URL in their I don't know what you call it. Their overall suite of file management that their company has, and it has like this dedicated URL to the set of files. And then they can build one group had some little tool that their data coordinator person would run to post updates, and work with that set of files. So that's also a possibility. And then finally, really, really technical, maybe more for the IT group than anything. If your files are in a AWS bucket or an Azure container, so that's really deep into whether you use like the Amazon Web Services or the Azure, the Microsoft Web Services. There's ways that our programmers can work with yours to get those systems to talk. But at any rate, the idea here really is maximizing the formalizing the capabilities of sharing to the extreme. That's kind of the most formal route. And the benefits would be it really, of course, maximizes the security of the content. If you want those, especially probably the product lists. It's usually why I put it in the title of these, is that the biggest concern from a confidentiality standpoint, from a security standpoint, the information in your product list, want to be very mindful where some of that goes, as opposed to just a casual list, a list of your favorite crops, whatever, right? But those product lists are important. So if it's really important, you want everyone in your group to have the same list, but we really need to keep in mind the security of making sure that can't get anywhere else, all of that control and structure, usually for a larger organization. But to be fair, there's nothing from our standpoint that would require a certain size of company. If you had 2 licenses and this was something viable, that's fine by us. There's nothing that we're going to dictate for a size requirement, but there is just the practical. Whoa, that lots of IT words I've used in the last 5 minutes as it is. That's a lot. So it might not be a fit for groups. That's just we don't have to worry about that. A lot of these options earlier on are just way simpler, right? And that really is the main downside, is the overhead of implementing that, and from your perspective, the data coordinator's perspective, it is a little more formal, a little bit more involved, because you're formally posting an update, because you're distributing the files. So like it's not this automatic behind the scenes syncing that we had in the previous options of just whatever you see in your ARM, we've got something magical that'll help make it so everyone else can see that too. It's more of I want to send out this package, this updated list, this updated whatever file here I have, it's a simple process, but it is a 1, 2, 3. I need to do this step, that step, that step, and now it's available to everyone. So it's just a little more form. So lots of options. Try to talk through pros and cons for each of them, but really the high level overview of, that's a lot. What would I even, where do I even start? What should I pick? Like I said, I kind of have a standard questionnaire as slowly has grown over time to help groups narrow down the options. And so these are usually the questions I ask, and then I can almost prescribe to the group, hey, I think this or that might be your best bet. So first and foremost, kind of really is how often are you wanting to update these lists or these files? Is just a once a year, twice a year, type of update sufficient? Because that would kind of be that one-time category where you can just manage and really control when you try to take this on. Or is it something where no, there's a time of year where we're adding things almost constantly, almost daily, or we're a big enough company, there's research in some part of the world all the time. So it needs to be constant. So the kind of the frequency of when you want updates to happen. Then the what. What would you like to share of those files that we've been talking about? Do you want them all? Is a blanket everything useful, or do you want to be specific and control what is being copied? Because I want others to be able to maintain their own certain lists or whatever. And then of course there's kind of the technical portion at the end, trying to figure out what technical place to put these files that we could get set up. Again, nowadays pretty easy to ask for. 5, 10 years ago, little less so, but now it's kind of a slam dunk. I've got just a couple of topics that to mention briefly, but if you do have any questions you were holding to the end, feel free to fire those across. Otherwise, I'll just kind of fill the last couple minutes with these specifics here. Did mention product lists a lot, and the standard way ARM implements those is there is a list file, LST, for each treatment type. So here on the screen, your herbicides, the inoculants, insecticides, G-herb, G-inoc, G-inse, they just match up with each treatment type. It's really just for cataloging, making them each separate, but there are just these little files that sit on your computer. There is a way you can bring those all together into one product database. And in ARM, we call that ARM codes. Just ends up being the name of that database file that the ARM software can talk with. And so it's something that you can maintain entirely in-house. As we talked about with confidentiality, we don't want to host it. We know you probably don't want us to host it. So it works best for everyone that we never have to get that list of products. We don't hold it or anything. We would just help guide you to set up that system. The database itself can be accessed, the MDB, or kind of a little more newer file format for databases, SQLite. Either one can work. And I think pretty much all of the options that we talked through today, pretty much any of those could be used to distribute that database as well. So it kind of fits hand in hand with this discussion, but it also technically can be a little bit separate as to whether you want to formalize. Again, this is specific to your treatment, product lists, None of the other lists fit in here. It's just your treatment lists, being able to do that. So question or comment here with the IT network, but admin rights make it kind of hard. Yeah, for sure. That's definitely a struggle. We share it when we're trying to kind of help clients get rolling with ARM. Then IT has all these um, rules and administration rights and things that create all of these hurdles. And yeah, it just makes it hard instead of being able to share. So yeah, definitely. If you're running into any of that and you're not sure if any of these options would possibly even work, feel free to reach out to us and just, you can send us an email and we can just ask, we can formulate some questions that we could send to, that you could send to IT and just try to um, spark a conversation because we do now and then have conversations directly with IT, just explaining our technical side, and try to be an ear to them to be like, hey, we're listening and care about the security that you care about, but we also want to unlock these capabilities for the R&D research and being able to make people more efficient. And a lot of times that helps just for them to hear that, hey, this GDM group that's making this software, yeah, I think they know what they're talking about, and we can maybe open some doors to make some of these solutions work. But definitely your comments hit home. We run into that a lot as well. So just don't feel that it's a dead end, but at the very least can be a good way to spark a conversation, and we can try to see if some progress can be made. And a quick question on the SQLite. The ARM user have to have this on their PC. We have transitioned our dictionary to SQLite. So I'm pretty certain, I'll peg it at, let's say 95% sure that if you did go the SQLite version on the product database, that ARM would be just happy and fine because we're already using that technology for the standard dictionaries. But I'll leave that 5% uncertainty. I'm not the programmer, so there's that small chance that there's some gotcha that would get me. But I'm pretty sure that other version, would work just smooth because we're already doing that. Great question. And basically out of time, my only last slide here is just to mention if SEs are of a particular interest to share with your groups. There's just a small gotcha in the way ARM uses SEs. When you create an SE, it's a totally separate file that's on your computer, but it can act a little goofy with your favorites list. So I won't go talk through all of it since we're at time, but just if you're interested and SEs matter to your group, just remember there's a little gotcha I should probably ask GDM about, and I can go into more detail as we're talking through this topic if your group wants to dive in to it. So not a big one. It's not a end all be all, but it's just a in the back of your head as you do it. Bringing in that favorites list in the SEs is the best approach. Is the short of it. Okay, I've filled up the time with words. Not a surprise if you've been on any of these webinars with us. For sure, like I said, reach out if you have questions, even if you just kind of want to start the conversation of whether any of these options would work for your group or not. We're here to help roll out some of those standardizations to everyone in your group. So thanks everyone, and have a great day.